We have been focusing on the Feast of Passover seen in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, and yesterday we learned about the significance of the 10th day of the month, which we see in Exodus 12:30. For each family of all the community of Israel is to take a lamb. It is here that the Bible uses the word community for Israel for the first time. With this command, Israel is forged into a community under God's commandments, one lamb per family. And if it is too much for a household, then 2 families. As with all sacrifices, it must be a lamb without any defect. It must be a male 1-year-old, and it must be either a goat or a sheep. The Israelites must then keep it in the house for 4 days. This means that the lamb must be examined carefully for defects that would make it unsuitable for the sacrifice. One explanation says that in the later sacrificial service, it was the general rule that a sacrificial animal was carefully examined for defects 4 days beforehand. This could also be done by the one who sold the sacrificial animal. But only in the case of the Paschal lamb, the person sacrificing the lamb must do so himself. Note that the period of 4 days only applied to the first time in Egypt. Later, it no longer had to be observed. The first time was the Passover. Later times, starting 1 year later, when Joshua entered into the land of Israel, the promised land, was the first time it was sacrificed as a remembrance. At the end of Exodus 12, instructions are given for later celebrations. So why a lamb of a goat or a sheep? The Midrash, the classic rabbinic Bible explanation, explains that this symbolizes the Egyptian deities. Israel had to renounce the Egyptian gods, of which there were many. With the lamb, they slaughtered the gods of Egypt and turned to the God of Israel. In Jewish tradition, it is told as one of the Passover miracles. The Egyptians were, of course, furious when they heard that the Israelites were taking lambs, their gods, into their homes and tying them to the table leg for 4 days before slaughtering them. But they were not able to do anything against it because God protected Israel. The Paschal lamb that stands not only for the transition from slavery to freedom, but also for the spiritual transformation from cultural and religious bondage to the service of the true God, something that we battle day in, day out, in, year out. We can all do with making sure we aren't in slavery and needing to come out of our Israel. With the blood of the slaughtered lamb, the Israelites had to sprinkle the doorposts. And the blood shall be for you a sign. It is a sign that the Israelites have renounced Egyptian idols and have become visibly obedient to God's commandment, even if their lives are in danger. But the Lord sees Israel's obedience and passes over their houses. That is the meaning of the word Pesach, to pass over or to skip over. The destroyer was unable to harm them. The Paschal lamb had to be slaughtered between the 2 evenings. So the Hebrew literally says, that was understood as afternoon when the sun is over its highest point and before sunset. It was then to be roasted whole on the fire. Not one leg of it was to be broken. It was only meant for Israel. Those who were not circumcised were not allowed to participate. This continued to be the case later on. According to Jewish tradition, many Israelites in Egypt, therefore, had still to be circumcised. That is also why a period of 4 days was observed. The Paschal lamb is thus not a sacrifice for sin. There is sometimes confusion about this. In the sanctuary, first the tabernacle and then later the temple, There were daily sacrifices for sin, including lambs, and a lamb was sacrificed daily, both in the morning and in the afternoon, as a symbol of devotion and meeting with God, but that must be distinguished from the Paschal lamb. But have you ever wondered why a lamb or other animal had to be killed at all? The first time that we come across the word blood is in Genesis 4, 1-16. You know the story, Cain and Abel. Abel kept sheep while Cain grew crops. We read that they both brought offerings to God, but Cain and his offering was not acceptable to God. The wording mentions that Abel offered a firstborn lamb, while Cain was not of the first crop, therefore not the best. What was in his heart? The next thing we read is that Cain, in a fit of jealousy and rage, killed his brother Abel. In verse 9 we read that Adonai, God, said to Cain, "Where is your brother?" Cain sins again by answering with a lie, "I don't know," and with a rebellious, "Am I my brother's guardian?" added on. No remorse there. God then says in verse 10, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground." The first murder has been committed, and God is clearly distressed by it. Later, in Genesis 9, 5-6, God tells Noah and his sons, "I will certainly demand an accounting for the blood of your lives. I will demand it from every animal and from every human being. Whoever sheds human blood by a human being, will his own blood be shed, for God made human beings in his image." Then comes the Exodus from Egypt, when God redeemed his people through the blood of a sacrificial lamb during the first Passover. We read about the ceremonial purity laws in the book of Leviticus, chapters 11 verse 1 to 17:16, given to Moshe and Aharon and his sons as instructions on how to keep dietary laws, as well as how to purify the temple, and sacrificial laws so that people could keep a close relationship with God. In Leviticus 17:11, God tells them that the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for yourselves, for it is the blood that makes atonement because of the life. In Romans, Paul tells us that by God's grace, without earning it, all are granted the status of being considered righteous before him through the act of redeeming us from our enslavement to sin that was accomplished by the Messiah, Yeshua. God put Yeshua forward as the covering for our sin through his faithfulness in respect to his bloody sacrificial death. Romans 3:24-25. The Apostle Paul writes, "For Christ, our Passover, also has been sacrificed." 1 Corinthians 5:7. It is in the context of a call to the believers in Corinth to purify their lives from sin, fornication, and, again, idolatry. Jesus died at the hour of the daily sacrifice in the temple. It was the afternoon of 14th of Nisan, the time that the Passover lambs too were slaughtered. He died as a blameless sacrifice. None of his bones were broken. We read in John 19:36, according to John's Gospel, Jesus died for the nation, and not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. John 11:51-52. In other words, to bring back the exiles of Israel. And here I include Christians who come to faith in the Messiah, Yeshua. this year, 14th of Nisan, the eve of Passover, occurs on a Friday, this evening in fact, the Shabbat. But the Shabbat always takes precedence. So the Seder, the meal Yeshua was celebrating the day he was taken to be killed, the Last Supper, will be observed on Saturday evening. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom, and I will be in touch with more tomorrow about maybe the unleavened bread and the significance of that, and whatever else is meaningful, but you are welcome to take part of the Passover, but otherwise you will be certainly thinking about the Passover lamb again when you celebrate next Friday, which is Good Friday and Easter. Shalom.